Today, we're diving into the incredible story of a 60-year search for a spiritual home. It's a journey that starts in a conservative Jewish family, winds through Christian monasteries and Eastern philosophy, and, well, it ends with a conclusion that the man himself never, ever saw coming. And this quote right here, it really captures the whole mystery of his story. I mean, how does a 60-year-old man, someone so deeply rooted in his Jewish heritage, get to a point that he would have literally laughed at just 1 minute before? That's the question we're going to unpack. So let's start at the beginning. The story begins, like so many do, in childhood. Sanford Pass was born into a conservative American Jewish family where faith was just a central part of life. But even as a little kid, he felt like something was off. You see, he was taught to memorize all the prayers and go through the rituals, but to him, it felt like a performance, like he was just going through the motions without any real deep meaning behind it. And then, when he was 14, a huge world event, the assassination of President Kennedy, just shook him to his core. And that really kick-started a lifelong habit of questioning absolutely everything. For his 13th birthday, his parents gave him this big choice. A lot of his friends were visiting Israel at the time, but Sanford, he chose the party. Looking back on it now, he sees that one simple decision as this key moment that steered him away from a path he just wasn't meant to take. And yeah, that decision, it really kicked off a much longer, much more winding road. For the next several decades, Sanford just wandered. He went through all these different beliefs and lifestyles, actively searching for a truth that actually felt right to him. And I mean, his journey was extensive. He dropped out of college to go live on a farm. He spent 3 full years completely immersed in a Christian monastery. And later on, he dove deep into meditation and Eastern philosophies. You name it, he was trying it, still looking for that one answer. But during this long search, something else was going on. Twice, he came face to face with death. And both times, he walked away with this powerful feeling that his life was being preserved for a reason he couldn't yet understand. The first incident, it's just terrifying. He was hitchhiking and got a ride with this really silent, unsettling driver. When he tried to get out, his hand got caught in the door handle. But instead of stopping, the driver just floored it, up to 75 miles an hour, dragging him right alongside the car on the highway. And then something extraordinary happened. He said everything went into slow motion, and he heard a voice, crystal clear, telling him, not yet. Miraculously, his hand slipped free, and he somehow survived with only minor injuries. He was convinced he'd been saved. And then, years later, it happened again. He was working on a 12-story roof. A bird startled him, and he stumbled backward, his foot slipping right over the edge. He was about to fall. But just then, he says he felt a large hand physically push him back onto the roof. These two events, they totally convinced him he was being kept alive for a very specific purpose. So what was this purpose? Well, the answer finally started to become clear when he was 60 years old. After all those decades of searching, the biggest clue came from the most unexpected place, his own son, and a book he'd been studying his entire life. Imagine this. His son comes to him and says this incredible thing. He tells his dad, a man who spent years in a monastery studying the Bible, that the prophecies he'd been looking for were right there all along, pointing to the Prophet Muhammad. Now, Sanford was skeptical, of course, but he was also curious, so he opened the book one more time. And here's what he found. It all came together across 3 key verses. First, he saw a prophecy in Deuteronomy about a prophet who would be like Moses. Then he connected that to a passage in John where Jesus talks about a spirit of truth who is going to come. But the final piece of the puzzle, the real clincher for him, was another verse in Deuteronomy. It describes God's light shining from 3 places: Sinai, Seir, and Paran. And in his interpretation, Sinai was Moses, Seir was Jesus, and Paran was an ancient name for Mecca, the very birthplace of Muhammad. And for him, this wasn't just some intellectual exercise. He described it as the words literally popping off the page at him, like they were 3-dimensional and shining. In that one moment, everything just clicked into place. He'd found something he couldn't ignore, couldn't explain away. That was it. That was his point of no return. So this massive discovery wasn't the end of his search. No, it was a profound new beginning, and it came with an experience he could barely even put into words. Okay, so to really get what happened next, we need to quickly talk about something called the Shahada. It's the simple but incredibly powerful declaration of faith in Islam. And for someone who's converting, it's seen as this moment of total rebirth, where the slate is just wiped completely clean. As he was just sitting there with this new realization, before he even formally said the words, he described this overwhelming physical sensation. It wasn't painful at all, but it was powerful. He said it felt like his rib cage was opening up like a set of doors, and his heart was just exploding. And right after that physical feeling came this huge emotional wave. He described tears not just rolling down his face, but literally flying from his eyes like birds. It was this moment of pure, total catharsis, the end of a search that had defined his whole life. See, this wasn't just about adopting a new religion. For Sanford, this was the moment his entire life finally snapped into focus. All those questions that started way back when he was a teenager, they suddenly had an answer. And for the first time, the world made sense. So, after a journey that crossed continents and crossed faiths, what was the single most important lesson that Sanford took away from his 60-year quest? He was actually asked this exact question. If you had just 1 minute, like a Super Bowl commercial, to share your life's discovery with everyone on the planet, what would you say? And his answer came in 4 simple parts. First, he'd say that there is only one God worthy of worship. Second, that Muhammad is his final messenger, completing the work started by Moses and Jesus. Third, he calls this truth everyone's birthright. And finally, his last point would be a simple invitation. Learn what Islam is for yourself. And, in his words, come home. And that last phrase, come home, it just leaves us with this powerful question to think about. For a man who wandered for 60 years, home wasn't a place, it was an answer. And it kind of makes you wonder, for all of us, what does it really mean to find your way and finally come home?